On the day my brother stood on stage surrounded by cameras and medals, I stood outside the ropes, forgotten. They said my name wasn't on the list. My parents didn't look back. My brother smirked, whispered. I never followed protocol. But I had, just not theirs. I turned to leave like always until a black SUV pulled up. A 4-star general stepped out and saluted me. Director Monroe, he said. The crowd fell silent. All eyes turned. For once, I wasn't the shadow behind the family legacy. I was the one who made it possible. And this time, they would see it. My heels clicked against the pavement with too much confidence for someone who wasn't on the list. But I had dressed for presence, not permission. The crowd outside the Capitol Hall buzzed with military brass, reporters, and proud families clinging to bouquets and flag pins. I kept walking until the security barriers stopped me literally. A young officer with cropped hair and a too-tight collar looked up from his tablet. Name, he asked, eyes flicking from my face to my civilian coat. Clara Monroe. He typed, then frowned. Tapped again, slower. You're not listed under today's clearance protocol. Try again, I said. Voice level. He did, still nothing. I'm sorry, Mom. This event is closed to decorated guests and family members of honorees only. I nodded once as if that didn't slice through me. Understood. Behind him, a line of dignitaries and family members streamed in without pause. My parents were among them, my mother in her classic ivory blazer and pearls, my father in his old navy dress jacket. They passed without looking in my direction, though I stood just feet away. Cameras flashed. They smiled. Not even a flicker of hesitation. Then Lucas appeared, taller than I remembered, polished and poised, medals gleaming on his lapel. He had always known how to wear the room like it belonged to him. When he saw me, his lips curved into a smile that wasn't one. Clara, he said, slowing for only a second. You didn't RSVP. I said nothing. He didn't wait for a response. Some people still don't understand protocol, he added, chuckling to his wife beside him. Then they were gone, swallowed by applause and ceremony. I took a small step back, letting the sharp edge of humiliation settle like frost in my lungs. I shouldn't have been surprised. This wasn't the first time I had been edited out of a family moment. Not even the 100th. At 8 years old, I won my school's math Olympiad. There was no dinner celebration. That same week, Lucas passed his swimming trial and my parents threw a backyard party. At 12, I gave a speech at the state science fair. My mother stayed home with a headache. Lucas hit a home run. They printed t-shirts. I wasn't unloved. I was invisible. Still, today was supposed to be different. I thought time and distance would have softened them. That maybe after a decade of silence, someone might ask where I had been, what I had done. I'd given them space. I had disappeared so perfectly into my work that they could pretend I was never there. Now with the sun glaring down and military songs blaring beyond the gates, the truth settled in my chest like weight. They hadn't forgotten me. They had erased me. The young officer shifted uncomfortably, sensing something deeper than protocol at play. Mom, I can. Maybe talk to someone. That won't be necessary, I said quietly. I turned slightly, my coat stiff around the shoulders. From here, I could just barely see the stage. The podium gleamed. Under the flaglined arch, a brass band stood in crisp formation. It was all arranged, pristine, prepared, just like Lucas. He'd always been the plan, the star. I was never even a subplot. As the crowd surged inside, and my brother's name echoed over the loudspeaker, a lump tightened in my throat, not out of envy. I didn't want the spotlight. I just didn't expect them to keep pretending I didn't exist. But that was the thing about families that build their narratives around a single hero. Everyone else has to be edited out. Just as I began to turn away, a low rumble approached from the edge of the security zone. A sleek black SUV, windows tinted, and moving with deliberate calm, rolled to a stop beside the gate. The young Officer's eyes flicked toward it, then back to me confused. The back door opened and a tall figure stepped out, stiff in posture, silver at the temples, wearing a dark four-star general's uniform that didn't need announcing. General Robert Langston, the man whose name moved initiatives through the Pentagon like gravity. He didn't glance at the officer. He looked at me. "Director Monroe," he said, his voice smooth, unfazed by the crowd now murmuring behind the barricades. We're beginning to think you weren't coming." I straightened just slightly, got held up at the gate. Langston's eyes narrowed, then turned to the stunned officer. "She's not on your list because her clearance outranks the list." The poor kid palled at. "Sir, I wasn't informed." "You weren't supposed to be." Langston's tone didn't rise, but it didn't need to. He stepped aside, extending an arm toward the entrance. "Shall we?" I nodded once and moved forward, fingers slipping beneath the lapel of my coat. With one fluid motion, I unfastened it, letting it fall open. The wind caught the edge, revealing deep navy blue underneath, formal service uniform, pressed to perfection. 4 rows of ribbons across my chest, twin stars on each shoulder. The ripple it caused was immediate. People turned, not in idle curiosity, but with a sudden quiet recognition. Murmurs grew. A man near the barricade lowered his camera slowly, adjusting his lens without taking the shot. An older veteran placed his hand over his heart. My name passed between mouths like a rumor suddenly proven true. "She's Monroe." "That's her, Director." Behind me, the officer who had tried so earnestly to find my name stood frozen, clipboard hanging useless in one hand. I gave him a nod, not unkind, just final. Then I stepped past him, Langston falling into stride beside me. We walked in silence, but not invisibility. For the first time in decades, I felt seen not for what I lacked, but for what I had built. The woman my family pretended had faded away now moved through their ceremony with deliberate steps and acknowledged presence. As we neared the front chairs, turned, conversations stilled one by one, heads followed us, and still I didn't look back. Up ahead, Lucas stood near the stage. He'd been laughing with someone, head thrown slightly back, but then he caught sight of me. The change was instant. His jaw slackened, his smile froze, then faltered. His eyes flicked to my uniform, then to the man beside me. His posture stiffened like he was bracing for impact. Good. Let it impact. We passed the row where my parents sat. My mother blinked twice, fingers tightening around her clutch. My father, always the composure, squinted as though distance might lie to him. Neither spoke. They didn't have to. Langston gestured toward a seat in the front row, marked and reserved. "Here," he said simply. A young lieutenant stood, abruptly, unsure if he should salute or step aside. He did both. I sat down, back straight, chin high, coat finally folded over one arm. I heard the brass band tuning their instruments. I heard announcers readying their scripts, but mostly I heard the absence of their assumptions. I was no longer the sister left off the list. I was the name no one dared forget again. Long before the medals, before the speeches and the salutes, there were science fairs and scraped knees. There were spelling bees and straight A's. There were afternoons when I waited at the kitchen table, certificate in hand, hoping for a glance of pride that never came. I was 8, the first time I realized recognition in our house had prerequisites. Lucas had just placed 3rd in a county swim meet. My parents threw a barbecue. I had won the school-wide academic decathlon, first place out of hundreds. But when I mentioned it over dinner, my father nodded absently and asked Lucas if his shoulder was still sore from the relay. My mother cleared my plate before I finished speaking. They didn't forget. They chose what mattered and what didn't. At 12, I was invited to a regional coding boot camp for gifted students. It was a big deal, sponsored by the Naval Science Outreach. I still remember the envelope, the gold seal, the excitement building in my chest as I handed it to my mom. Her first words, "Will it interfere with Lucas's championship week?" By 15, I stopped trying to outshine him, not because I couldn't, but because even my brightest moments dimmed in their lens. I didn't envy Lucas. Not really. He didn't ask for the pedestal. But once they built it, he learned to stand tall. They taught me to stand aside. Let him have this, Clara. My father used to say, you don't need the spotlight to be valuable. But what he meant was, your light makes his harder to see. So I shrink. I kept to the edges of photographs. I found solace in labs and late-night research. I let my achievements stay pinned to the bulletin boards of empty hallways instead of framed in our living room. By 18, I had full ride offers to 3 Ivy Leagues. But I turned them all down for the Naval Academy. It wasn't rebellion. It was escape. The idea of serving something bigger than their expectations felt like oxygen. At Annapolis, I learned not just discipline, but silence. I excelled in systems intelligence, cyber counter measures, pattern disruption. I graduated in the top 5%, but no one in my family attended the ceremony. I told myself they were busy. Truthfully, I never invited them. I didn't want to watch them glance at their watches during the biggest moment of my life. From there, my path narrowed and sharpened. I was recruited into strategic naval intelligence before my 24th birthday. Then Joint Cyber Command. Then Deep Signal Operations. So classified, I sometimes didn't know who I was reporting to. But I thrived there. Behind locked doors and encrypted layers. I wrote code that reversed threats before they hit our shores. I analyzed risk trajectories for drone escalations before the news even heard whispers. And yet no birthday calls, no. Where are you stationed texts, just silence. A silence that grew over the years like a wall lined with family photos I was never in. I watched Lucas's rise from a distance. Newspaper clippings, online interviews. His career was a parade while mine was a shadow. And somehow my parents seemed to believe I had vanished by choice or worse. Failed. There was no space in their version of our family for someone who operated behind curtains. I wasn't ashamed of what I did. But I did begin to wonder every now and then if I'd ever be more than a footnote. That's the irony, isn't it? I specialized in signal disruption, making invisible forces tilt outcomes. But I had become invisible myself until today. 16 months ago, a recon unit went dark along the Strait of Hormuz. 3 hours of radio silence, then a distress signal, barely encrypted, nearly missed. While command scrambled, I was already running intercept analysis from a secure floor beneath the Pentagon. 2 minutes in, I saw it. A hidden spike in frequency patterns. Not a glitch, a warning. They were walking into a trap. I initiated counter-surveillance redirection, scrambled a decoy ping, and rerouted drone reconnaissance through an unlisted satellite stream. Within 9 minutes, I had real-time visuals of enemy formations closing in on our men. The mission wasn't just compromised, it was seconds from becoming a massacre. I didn't wait for chain of command approvals. There wasn't time. I issued a black-level directive, activated a dormant strike protocol, and greenlit an extraction op under direct authority. The paperwork could come later. Lives were bleeding now. 23 minutes after the first signal, our forces were airborne. Extraction succeeded. No fatalities. But had we waited another 10 minutes, the news would have read like a memorial wall. I never met those Marines. I never heard their names. But I read the debrief reports later. One mentioned hearing a woman's voice through the static say, "Turn south now." They didn't know it was me. No one ever does. Not until today. That mission was later cited in an internal intelligence review as the reason a new cyber-forward doctrine was drafted. They called it precision preempt. What they didn't mention was that the core algorithm came from code I'd written 4 years earlier. During a Black Ops simulation, no one bothered archiving publicly. It didn't matter. The work spoke for itself. But back home, they still thought I taught at a community college. I remember Thanksgiving 2 years ago. Lucas was home, on leave full of stories and plaques. I dropped by unannounced just to see them. My mother handed me a slice of pie and asked if I was still teaching those adult computer classes. I nodded. I didn't correct her. What would have been the point? Her version of me fit neatly inside their family narrative. The quiet daughter, harmless and polite, who lived somewhere outside DC and didn't cause ripples. Meanwhile, her real child was commanding fleet drills and giving keynote speeches. She never asked what I did, only whether I was eating enough. My father once joked at a barbecue that I must be the tech support for the Navy. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I knew how many layers of clearance he'd have to go through just to understand the first line of my job description. I lived in layers they would never peel back. But that wasn't the part that hurt. It was that they never tried. To them, silence was convenience. A daughter who stayed quiet was a daughter who didn't disturb the script. But scripts burn, and today mine was being rewritten in real time on the same lawn they had walked past me on like I was scenery. I wasn't angry. I was done waiting. Let them sit in their curated stories. Let them adjust their lenses. Meanwhile, I would lead operations that shifted global tides, one encrypted thread at a time. Director Monroe, that's who I was. And the irony, the brother they polished for photo ops, the one they bet all their pride on, would never know how many times my orders had kept him breathing. Yet I never asked for credit, only space. And now I had taken it. The hall inside the Capitol Pavilion was soaked in protocol. Crisp uniforms, polished shoes, flags aligned to the inch. A brass band played low notes of ceremony while rows of decorated officers filled the white chairs, backs straight, hands folded neatly in their laps. The place hummed with tradition, and then it fell quiet. Langston and I entered without announcement. Yet every step we took carved silence in our wake. The thrum of small talk faltered, heads turned, not in curiosity, but with caution, then realization. I walked past ranks of men and women who had only seen my name in clearance tags or mission briefs. Today they saw the person. My uniform was dark navy, the fabric formal, unwrinkled by time or tension. The ribbons across my chest told stories I would never say aloud. The stars on my shoulders gleamed beneath the spotlights, not metaphorical. One's literal. I passed a captain who reflexively stood, then saluted. Others followed. It wasn't theater, it was respect. In the second row, a junior lieutenant fumbled his phone as he tried to understand the first line of my job description. I lived in layers they would never peel back. But that wasn't the part that hurt. It was that they never tried. To them, silence was convenience. A daughter who stayed quiet was a daughter who didn't disturb the script. But scripts burn, and today mine was being rewritten in real time on the same lawn they had walked past me on like I was scenery. I wasn't angry. I was done waiting. Let them sit in their curated stories. Let them adjust their lenses. Meanwhile, I would lead operations that shifted global tides, one encrypted thread at a time. Director Monroe, that's who I was. And the irony, the brother they polished for photo ops, the one they bet all their pride on, would never know how many times my orders had kept him breathing. Yet I never asked for credit, only space. And now I had taken it. The hall inside the Capitol Pavilion was soaked in protocol. Crisp uniforms, polished shoes, flags aligned to the inch. A brass band played low notes of ceremony while rows of decorated officers filled the white chairs, backs straight, hands folded neatly in their laps. The place hummed with tradition, and then it fell quiet. Langston and I entered without announcement. Yet every step we took carved silence in our wake. The thrum of small talk faltered, heads turned, not in curiosity, but with caution, then realization. I walked past ranks of men and women who had only seen my name in clearance tags or mission briefs. Today they saw the person. My uniform was dark navy, the fabric formal, unwrinkled by time or tension. The ribbons across my chest told stories I would never say aloud. The stars on my shoulders gleamed beneath the spotlights, not metaphorical. One's literal. I passed a captain who reflexively stood, then saluted. Others followed. It wasn't theater, it was respect. In the second row, a junior lieutenant fumbled his phone as he tried. Crowd. I wasn't searching for anything, just observing the way I always did. Watching people when they thought no one was. That's when I saw her. Third row. Center right, polished, composed. Her hair was shorter now, her posture straighter. But I'd know that face. Anywhere. Jenna Carter. For a second, my breath caught. Not because she was here, but because she was smiling at my family like she belonged. Jenna, the person who once called me her sister in everything but blood. The same person who had walked into the academy office 17 years ago and claimed my capstone project as her own, said she was helping me out by sharing the work. Said it would even out since I'd already secured my placement. What? She didn't say. What she didn't need to was that Lucas needed those credits to boost his graduation standing after failing his systems module. He'd missed the deadlines. I hadn't, so they took mine. She passed it off with charm, of course, and Lucas submitted a modified version of the code I'd spent months building. I didn't fight it. The consequences would have meant dragging the family name into academic dishonor. My father would have said I was overreacting. My mother would have cried. Lucas would have smiled and reminded everyone that I was always too sensitive. So I said nothing like I always did until now. Jenna hadn't noticed me yet. Not fully. She was too busy whispering to my mother, who nodded with tight-lipped poise. My father leaned in too, as if still puzzled that someone like Jenna had stayed in touch while his own daughter had drifted into obscurity. I wanted to feel nothing. I'd trained for it, built my life around compartmentalization. Focus, mission first. But betrayal never files itself away neatly. The sting came. Not from the theft. That was old news. It came from seeing how easily she had been folded into the narrative of my absence, as though she'd replaced me, not just in credit, but in context. She had my parents' attention. She had Lucas's trust. She had the version of me that was allowed to exist in their world. Smart, helpful, non-threatening. And now she was here watching him receive his medal still in the photo. I glanced down at the insignia on my shoulder. Twin stars, confirmed rank. Earned, not inherited, not borrowed. They could smile at her all they wanted. I wasn't the shadow anymore. Let her stay in their curated scrapbook. I had walked out of it years ago and built something they couldn't frame. Still, as the ceremony continued and the announcer read Lucas's achievements in precise, grand tones, I felt the old bitterness stir, not because I needed revenge, but because it reminded me just how long I had carried their silence and hers. Langston leaned slightly toward me again. Everything all right? I didn't answer at first, then. Funny how some people stay in the story by removing others from it. His eyes followed my line of sight. Then he nodded once. She's not the story anymore. He was right. I was. The master of ceremonies cleared his throat into the mic, his voice crisp against the backdrop of perfect spring air. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the presentation of the Medal of National Valor to Commander Lucas Monroe. The audience stood in unison. The band played again, ceremonial and proud. Lucas stepped up to the podium like he'd done it 1,000 times in the mirror. Back straight, hands just so, jaw angled toward the light. The medal glinted on his chest, a sunburst of gold and blue. He waited for the crowd to settle, his gaze sweeping the rows like a seasoned performer. Then he began. I stand before you today not because of what I've accomplished alone, he said. Voice smooth rehearsed, but because of the mentors, the examples, the leaders, and the family who shaped me. There it was, family. I didn't flinch, but I could feel a subtle tightening in my gut. He continued, to my wife Marissa, who held our home together across continents and deployments, you're the calm in every storm. To my mother, whose grace taught me strength. And to my father, whose discipline taught me focus, I owe you everything. Applause, not polite, sincere. And to the educators who saw potential when all I saw was doubt. Thank you for pushing me to be more than I believed I could. Another pause, another smile. Still no mention. He scanned the crowd. For a beat too long. And that's when it happened. His eyes caught mine. The flicker was subtle. A second too long. Not surprise anymore, not confusion. Guilt. His mouth tightened. Then he looked away. And to every service member in this room, past, present, and future, this medal is not mine alone. It belongs to all of us. To the unseen, the unthanked, the uncelebrated. Your sacrifice does not go unnoticed. It was almost enough. Almost. But it wasn't acknowledgement. Not of me, not of what I'd done. Not just for him, but for the institution that now stood to honor him. The applause came anyway, a standing ovation. People clapped, some cheered, the band struck a triumphant chord. And yet, beneath the praise, beneath the performance, something cracked because everyone in that front row had seen it. The empty space where a sister's name should have been. Langston didn't clap. He didn't need to. He glanced over at me, expression unreadable. A woman 2 seats down leaned toward her husband and whispered something. He replied without looking. He didn't mention her. No, he didn't. I kept my face still, posture firm. This was the silence I'd been trained for. The moment where ego stepped aside for duty, where professionalism overrode pain. But for once I let the ache stay just long enough to feel it because it mattered. Not the omission, but the clarity. He knew I was here. He chose not to speak my name. That was its own kind of speech. The applause still echoed when I caught the smallest detail, a folded paper still on the podium, caught briefly in the breeze. Before an aide picked it up. One edge visible just long enough for me to read. The initials in the corner. J.C. Jenna Carter. Of course, I should have seen it earlier. The cadence, the polished humility, the carefully crafted phrases about the uncelebrated and the quiet strength of family. It wasn't Lucas's voice. Not really. It was too measured, too tailored to perfection. It was hers. The same woman who once edited my project file just to clean it up, only to submit it under someone else's name. The same woman who back in Annapolis told me with a soft smile that recognition was overrated right before taking mine. Now she was ghostwriting legacy speeches for my brother. The betrayal wasn't fresh. It was aged, fermented over years, but the bitterness still bloomed in my mouth. Not because I needed credit, but because even now, even here, the narrative still favored the familiar comfort of omission. Lucas had stood on that stage with a metal pin to his chest and spoke about invisible heroes, all while erasing the one sitting less than 50 feet away. And the person who helped him do it was someone who once called me her best friend. My hands clenched in my lap. Around me the audience had begun to sit again. The air was shifting, buzzing with post-spec reflections soft. Praise, pride. No one was looking at me now. Their eyes were forward again, focused on the next segment. I stood. The movement was small, but immediate. Langston glanced up. The lieutenant next to me startled slightly, unsure whether to rise, too. I didn't need fanfare. I only needed clarity. As I stepped into the aisle, a wave of tension swept through the nearest rows. Conversations hushed. Someone whispered my name, not in greeting, but in realization. She's leaving. I walked past them. Rows of officials, dignitaries, even Lucas's commanding officer. And I didn't slow. I didn't pause for the murmurs, for the double takes. I didn't look at my parents. I didn't look at Jenna. But I felt it like a current reversing midstream. Somewhere near the back, I heard someone say aloud too loudly to be an accident. She wasn't in the speech. A beat later, another voice sharper. She should have been. I didn't smile. Not because I wasn't moved, but because vindication doesn't always come with joy. Sometimes it comes with silence, shifting its weight. Sometimes it comes with a woman walking out. Not in protest, but in peace. Let them keep their script. Let them decorate their moments with half-truths. I had outgrown the need to be included in a story that was never written for me. And maybe, just maybe, the audience finally realized they had applauded the wrong version. The reception lawn was dressed like a magazine spread. Tables in crisp linen, polished silver trays. Ambient music floating from speakers nestled in potted palms. Guests chatted in small circles. Laughter punctuated with toasts. Photographers moved discreetly, snapping candids of dignitaries and family huddles. I stayed near the perimeter, not hiding, observing. It was always easier to see truth from the edge. Then, through the crowd he came. Lucas walked alone. No wife, no medals clinking with pride. Just a man cutting across a celebration he no longer seemed certain he deserved. He stopped 2 steps from me. His face was taut as if he'd been holding a question too long, and it had warped in his mouth. "Admire Monroe," he said softly. I returned a slight nod. "Commander," he shifted on his feet. The formality sounded strange coming from him. We'd played in the same backyard. We'd built blanket forts in the same basement. And now here we were, strangers in uniform. "I didn't know," he said. His voice was strained. Not apologetic, more like someone realizing a test had already been graded. "You're still in service." I tilted my head. "You never asked." He looked away. Silence. Stretched. Not hostile, just raw. "I thought you left after Annapolis," he added. "You stopped coming around. No calls, no updates. You stopped expecting them." He exhaled slow and unsteady. "Mom said you were doing something with computers. Teaching maybe." I raised an eyebrow. "Tech support, wasn't it?" He winced. I didn't press. He didn't need reminding. He needed reckoning. Lucas glanced down at his shoes, then back at me. "So all this time, all the years I've been where I was needed," I said. He nodded slowly, processing. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" I gave him a long look. Would it have mattered? He didn't answer because we both knew the truth. In our family, narratives weren't facts. They were habits. And habits are hard to rewrite. He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. "The operation in the Gulf last year. The rooted carrier. Deployment." "Yes," I said, already knowing what he was about to ask. "That was you?" I nodded once. Lucas swallowed hard. "You saved lives." I did my job. For a moment, neither of us moved. The sounds of the reception carried faintly around us, but they felt miles away. We stood on an island of realization, him arriving, me already settled. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "You don't need to say anything." But even as I spoke the words, I saw something shift behind his eyes, something unspoken, fragile, trying to surface. And maybe for the first time, he understood. Lucas's jaw tensed as if holding back the tide of something bigger than regret, something like recognition. "I didn't know it was you," he said again. But this time the words weren't defensive. They were soft, raw. "That night," he continued, "we were boxed in. GPS failed. Comms scrambled. We had no exit route. Someone rerouted us in real time, gave us a clean corridor to evac, less than 6 minutes from breach to airborne." I said nothing. He studied me slower now, not like a sibling confused, but like a soldier realizing the weight of the uniform in front of him. I remember hearing the order come through. It was clipped, low-frequency override. They said it came from a level I'd never heard of before. Something called Project Echo Delta. I met his eyes. "That was mine," I said. Simply. Lucas blinked, no argument, no denial. Just a long silence, as if he was watching his entire understanding of history shift beneath his feet. "You weren't just there," he said quietly. "You were in command." "Yes. And you knew that I was part of that deployment." "Yes." He exhaled, a breath heavy with disbelief. "You didn't say anything, not even after." "It wasn't relevant." "Wasn't relevant?" He echoed, shaking his head slightly. "You rewrote an entire mission that saved over 200 men, including me. And you just moved on?" "I moved forward," I corrected. "That's what we do." He stared at the grass for a long second. Then, when he looked up, something had changed. His face hadn't softened exactly, but it had steadied. His voice no longer held that clipped ceremonial rhythm. It was reverent now. "You didn't just disappear," he said. "You became the person we all owe." "That's not why I came." "I know," he said. Then he stepped back slowly and straightened. I knew the stance before. He even moved. Feet together, shoulders square, hand to brow, the military salute. It wasn't the sloppy kind offered at ceremonies for photos. This was sharp, practiced, precise. And it wasn't from a brother to a sister. It was from a subordinate to a superior, from a man who now understood the chain of command included the one person he'd overlooked his entire life. I returned. It without hesitation, not out of pride, out of recognition. For the first time. We stood in the same story, not as siblings fighting for a role, but as officers who had earned their place. The message came on a quiet Sunday morning, tucked between encrypted intel briefings and logistical reports. No subject line, no emojis, no punctuation. "Dinner, just us. Sunday at 6, Marcus. We'll be there." It was from my mother. She didn't sign her name. She didn't ask. She just sent it as if there had never been a decade of silence, of missed calls and unopened invitations. I stared at the screen for a long time. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because for the first time, I didn't need to say anything. I just replied, "Okay." That evening, I drove the familiar road to the house I once called home. The trees hadn't changed. The mailbox still bore the same nameplate, the Monroe's. The porch light flickered with the same faulty bulb. Even the garden gnome chipped at the hat, still leaned left. Like it always had. But the feeling was different. This wasn't return. It was reconnaissance. The front door opened before I knocked. My brother. He wore a soft gray sweater. Sleeves pushed to his elbows, a dish towel slung over one shoulder. His eyes met mine, calm but searching. "You're early," he said. "You're surprised," I replied. He smiled faintly. "Yeah." Inside, the house smelled of roast chicken and rosemary. The same scent that once marked every holiday, every report card dinner, except I was never the reason for it. My mother moved between the kitchen and dining room with efficient grace, plating food like choreography. She didn't hug me. She didn't reach for my coat, but she looked at me, really looked, and said, "There's iced tea or I can open a bottle." "Iced tea is fine." We sat, just the three of us. No photographers, no speeches, no polished medals. Dinner was served on the same white china they'd saved for guests. Except now I wasn't the guest. The silence wasn't awkward. It was spacious. Like everyone was waiting for someone else to name the thing sitting between us. So I didn't. I let them. And slowly. The conversation crept in, neutral at first. "How's Washington?" my mother asked. "Efficient," I said. Lucas added. "They're pushing new cyber integration protocols in the Pacific." My mother blinked. "Oh, that's you." I nodded. "Partly?" She sipped her tea. "It's good work. Not praise, not pride, but something close. Maybe the closest she could give." We moved through dinner like diplomats. No sudden movements, no emotional escalations, just measured forks and quiet acknowledgments. But it was enough because everything around us was the same. And I no longer needed it to be different. I had changed. That was enough. Dessert came quietly. Peach cobbler, warm and familiar. My mother spooned it onto each plate like a ritual she'd performed for years. Same amount. Same order, like muscle memory never faded, even when the people around the table did. I was halfway through my portion when my father cleared his throat. It was the sound that once commanded rooms. Now it just silenced them. He set down his fork with deliberate care, folded his hands, and looked at me. "I want to say something," he began, voice low. My shoulders didn't tense, my breath didn't shift. I just nodded once. Permission granted. "I got a letter 10 years ago," he said. "From the Department of Defense." Lucas looked up sharply. My mother stopped mid-reach for her water glass. My father continued. "Standard security clearance inquiry. They were vetting Someone for a command-level position. It had your name on it. He paused, watching me. I called an old friend in D.C. Asked if it was a mistake. He told me it wasn't. The silence pressed in. I knew. Then, he said. I knew you were still in. That you weren't just working with computers or teaching. That you were more. He didn't say the word. He didn't say admiral. He didn't say strategic. Command, just more, as if that were suddenly enough. And I asked, voice calm, and I didn't tell anyone. My mother looked at him, eyes wide. You never said, I thought. He hesitated. I thought maybe you wanted it that way, that if I said something, it might bring up old tensions. I stared at him, not with fury, just the weight of what had been swallowed for a decade. You knew? I asked. Yes. You knew I was. Still serving, still advancing. Still, I did. And you let them think I'd faded away. He didn't answer, but his silence was the answer. My throat tightened, but I held posture. Years of military formality kept my chin from dropping. You let them believe I'd given up, I said. That I'd failed, that I didn't have what it took. His eyes dropped to the table, and then finally I said it. I don't need you to admit I was worth something. He looked up, startled. I don't need your approval. I don't need your regret. I only needed you not to lie, by omission. The words landed like steel in a quiet room. I don't need you to acknowledge me now, I said. I just need you to stop pretending I was never there. No one spoke. The cobbler cooled in silence, and for the first time I let the pain sit openly between us. Not hidden, not armored, just real. The office door bore a new plaque. Vice Admiral Clara Monroe, Director, Pacific Hybrid Operations Command. It was minimalist, no gold trim or engraved flourishes, just black font on brushed steel, understated like the woman it belonged to. Inside, the air smelled of old concrete and newer ambition. Staff moved with quiet urgency already, adjusted to the cadence of a leader who didn't raise her voice to command attention. This wasn't just a promotion. It was a recalibration. I stood at the floor-to ceiling window, overlooking the P2C, my reflection flanked by satellite projections and encrypted readouts. The Pacific Theater had become volatile. Cyber breaches, AI-driven drone interference, algorithmic targeting. The next global conflict wouldn't begin with missiles. It would begin with silence. And I was here to stop it. My phone vibrated. One word, West Wing. 15 minutes later, I stood in the Situation Room beneath the White House. No slides, no bullet points, just clarity. The president sat across from me. Former Navy, sharp eyes, and no patience for fluff. Around her, Joint Chiefs, NSA leads, Homeland Security. I began without preamble. We don't need more firepower, I said. We need predictive disruption. Intelligence that moves before the threat even recognizes its own shape. A few pens froze mid-note. We're no longer defending coastlines, I continued. We're defending neural networks, financial scaffolding, satellite command chains. The next battlefield is data, and the weapon is latency. I laid out the plan, a hybrid net of quantum triangulation, nonlinear threat mapping, and live infiltration. Suppression, preemptive logic. No slides, no acronyms, just results. When I finished, no one clapped. They didn't need to. The room was still, the kind of still that comes when people realize they've just been briefed by someone who isn't offering theories, but doctrine. The president leaned forward. How soon can you implement? We already have, I said. She nodded. Once. Proceed. That was all, and it was everything. 3 days after the White House briefing, my assistant handed me a transfer request. I recognized the name before I finished the header. Commander Lucas Monroe. He wasn't asking for rank, adjustment, commendation, or relocation perks. Just one sentence. Request. Reassignment as strategic liaison under Vice Admiral Monroe's direct command. There was no additional note, no explanation. He didn't need one. That afternoon, I called him in. We met in my new office. Same window, same Steel plaque. He stood just inside the doorway. No swagger, no formality, just presence. I read your request, I said. He nodded. I meant every word. Why? Because I need to understand what I missed. He didn't elaborate. Didn't fall into sibling language or shared childhood memories. Just stood there, a man asking not for forgiveness, but for proximity to truth. I don't want a title, he added. I don't want credit. I just want to learn from the person I should have seen a long time ago. I studied him. He didn't look defeated. He looked ready, and that made all the difference. I reached across the desk and handed him the approval. Welcome aboard, Commander. He smiled, small, but real. And just like that, we weren't rewriting history. We were building forward. A week later, I was walking past a recruitment center in Arlington when I saw it. New banner, fresh print. Hung across the front glass with clean tension. It stopped me cold. My face. Mid-stride in full uniform, cap tucked under one arm, gaze forward, no background blur, no embellishment, just me. Above the image, bold text, built, not born. 3 words, no family name, no borrowed legacy, just the truth. I stared at it for a long moment, not because I needed to admire it, but because I finally understood its purpose, not pride signal. Behind me, a few new recruits stood in line, whispering. One pointed at the poster. That's her, someone said. She rewrote the doctrine. No one mentioned my brother. No one asked who my parents were. They didn't need to because for the first time the world didn't see Clara Monroe as an echo of someone else's spotlight.